here's another view. Wallpaper, and then look, it's got also exposed beams. So it feels very kind of rustic feeling with this kind of elegance of the wallpaper, but the wallpaper is much, much simpler, much more bolder, geometric in the way that it's shaped. And even the lamp here is not an ornate, kind of flourishy chandelier. It looks kind of rustic and kind of masculine even in the way that it's contrived. So think about that for a second. Think about what we're seeing here, this contrast between these white stuccoed walls, the hand-hewn beams that look like they're very rustic, and then the elements of wallpaper that are kind of tucked into it, but very geometric, very kind of bold graphically in the way that this is contrived. How do you think people would have responded to this, knowing this Victorian attitude that they had at the time? Thinking back to what we were looking at as far as the aesthetics of the Victorians. What do you think?
This sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would they say?
Bingo.
Why would they say this sucks? Why?
Smack in the face.
Simple.
Too simple? What else? What do you
Not
think?
expensive enough?
Not expensive enough? Anybody else?
Yeah, it's sort of like smacked lowbrow, like kind of like cheap.
Remember, so what we know is that they did all of these decorative things. They were doing, silhouettes and lace and all of that stuff because they were trying to give off the impression that they were had so much free time in their lives that they could fill their time up with all of this idle little stuff, this decoration, to the point that they just overdid it, and their houses were completely filled with all of this stuff, kind of like those hoarding sites, just overlapping on top of each other, too much stuff, too much information, too much stuff, over-embellishing all of the things that they did. And they had this term for that fear of white space, or vacui. William Morris is introducing white space. And so they would have looked at this and they would have thought, oh my God, that's so strange, that's so weird. But at the same time, there was a beauty to what was being done here. It was not what they were used to seeing peasants living in. They were looking at this and they were saying, wow, that's kind of interesting. And it caught on. People started to go, wow, that's a very different perspective, different from what I'm used to seeing. So he's still instilling the idea of wallpaper. He's still instilling the idea of quality pieces, because these are all handmade pieces. But now it's mixed in with some of the things that were part of that lower class society. So there would be this contrast in the way that people would view his stuff. But the other thing that I have to ask about this space, going backwards here, is now that he's got this house, that he's built this house for his wife, his new wife that he's crazy in love with, there's a problem. Anybody think of the problem that might exist once you have a house, an empty house, and a new bride?
She doesn't like it.
Children. Who said what? I'm sorry. Children? No, they ended up having children. That wasn't the problem. There was a problem.
Furnishing?
Yeah, furniture. So think about what kind of furniture would have been available at this time. They have this grand house that's very rustic looking, very kind of country-ish. And think about the kind of furniture that would have been popular then. This. Does that fit into that space? Mm-hmm.
No.
Veneered with gold filigree
Too fancy.
And these tiny little delicate little tables. It just doesn't seem like it would work in a space like this. And so once again, William Morris turned to his friends, his artists and architecture friends, and he said, okay, we need some furniture to go into this house. And so they started to create furniture that would have felt like it was from the medieval times. And they built these big, heavy cabinets that they weren't afraid to put decoration on them. Lots of, again, decorative elements that they were incorporating into it. And again, it's kind of over the top. But it's all of the same theme, the same era that they're using it in. And the thing that was really beautiful about this is that they would have these great, big, massive pieces of furniture, but that was all. They didn't do lots and lots of these pieces of furniture. They had one big piece of furniture And then lots of white space around it. So even though the pieces of furniture are big and ornate and took up massive amounts of room, the fact that they had so much white space around them, or they were very tasteful in the way that they were incorporating other elements with it, made it feel very balanced. And so it's the first time that we see the design that we appreciate today, where there's a balance between too much and too little, where we're using that white space to draw the eye. So we can see here that he's got wallpaper on the walls, but again, he's got this white wainscoting that's going on with the wall, and then the rest of the wall, and then this big credenza that's there, the dining hutch that's there, but very small chairs and very delicate chairs that are sitting side by side with it. So it feels like there's a balance that's going on in this space. And so he did this over and over again. He just built furniture. And after a while, he filled his house up, and all of his friends from the pre-Raphaelite movement, all of these artists, they all came together, and they would come to his house, and this house became kind of a monument to the pre-Raphaelite movement. And people came from all over to see this house and what was in it. And again, because William Morris was from a wealthy family, he didn't necessarily need to work for a living, but he wanted to have something to occupy his time. He decided, maybe I'll just take this idea for this house and the furnishings that I've done, and I'll start a company. And that's exactly what he did. He started a furniture company called Morris and Company. And through it, he sold a lot of the pieces of furniture that were very country-ish, very rustic-looking pieces of furniture, and he sold those. And then after a while, he started to get involved with wallpaper, and he started to get involved with tapestries and fabrics and all of that stuff. But his real claim to fame came through one piece of furniture in particular that people really liked because it was so different from everything else in the era. And they called it the Morris chair. It looked like this. And we look at this and we go, wow, that's a lot of decoration on this chair. But again, if we think about some of those overwrought, nasty pieces of furniture that we were looking at last week that were tied to the Victorian era, this is actually a very pared back version of some of those pieces of furniture. Plus, this chair was far more functional than a lot of the other chairs that were existing in that time.
It was like an Adirondack chair almost, but without the wood. So it looks like.
Yeah, in fact, the Adirondack chair is pretty much modeled after
Oh,
this
okay.
chair.
That makes sense.
This chair has a special feature to it. Can anybody see what that special feature might be? It's kind of obscure.
Kind of wheels in front, those wheels.
It does have wheels, but that's not really necessarily the thing. I don't know why they put wheels on their chairs for a while.
Does it recline?
It does. Good job. You see it. So back here, it's got a couple of little slots in the back, and it's got a knob that sits in it. And what you could do is you could lift up that back piece and just slot it into different positions, and the chair would recline back. Why was that so different from anything anybody else had seen at that time?
They're a lot more comfortable, I guess.
It was. What do you think, Taylor?
I think any of the furniture kind of like moved in that way. All of it was kind of just like stiff and stuff.
Yeah. Why do you think the furniture was stiff and stuck? What do you think?
They were more focused on making it like ornate and designed and stuff.
That, but there's another reason too. Anybody else? Okay.
It's a
Did
social.
they not really want people to sit on their furniture?
That's funny though. That's good. That's good. My grandma said that stuff.
They didn't want people alone. They didn't want them to drape themselves over the furniture like what we do now. I don't
Lazy
know about
boy.
you guys, but it's like I get on my couch and just like that.
Yeah.
Just lay there. But there was a really big reason why they didn't do that, why they didn't lounge in their furniture. And it was because of the clothing that they were wearing.
That was my next guess.
Think about, anybody here seen the movie Gone with the Wind?
Oh God.
You might remember there's a scene in it
yeah.
where she's being cinched up and she wants her 16-inch waist and all of that. Anybody know how big a 16-inch waist is? Take your thumbs, bring them together with the middle finger. That's 16 inches. That's 8 inches right there. That's 8 inches right there. That's
Anorexic,
16
like.
inch. That's a 16-inch waist. She wanted her waist to be that big, and that was the norm in those days. Honest to God, that was the norm. Women were getting themselves so corseted into these dresses that they couldn't breathe, that they were literally sucking the rib cage into their internal organs, and there were yeah, exactly, it's just like, oh, how awful. There are testimonials, there are doctors, documentation of women who had actually bifurcated their livers because their
Yikes.
rib cage had cut it in half, their livers in half.
Must have killed them. I mean.
Well, and then you think about what the norm for women was in those days. Women were sitting around making lace. They weren't out like jogging around the block. They weren't running. They certainly weren't doing the laundry. Part of the reason that they weren't doing it was because they would pass out because they couldn't breathe.
I bet.
And there was a time around the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s when having pale complexion and almost blue lips was vogue. That was fashionable. And this kind of sickly appearance that these women had was because they couldn't breathe, they couldn't eat, they couldn't digest, they had horrible digestive problems, an awful lot of them. And what's even worse was they were doing this to their children too. So
Oh dear.
little girls would learn from the age of 6 to 8 years old how they would start to get their first corset. And they wouldn't start at 16-inch waist, but they would tighten them in. And by the time they got to be teenagers, they were so used to having their waist cinched in, it stopped hurting. So they just got so used to having these tiny little tight waists. And the even sillier part is men were doing it too. Not to the same extreme as women, but men did wear corsets. And so they would have these tapered waists also. And so everybody was sitting in these garments that absolutely allowed no slouching in your spine. In fact, there was a point when, after a while, when people started to rebel from this, and women would start to toss away their corsets, that their spinal muscles, their muscles along their spinal column, were so atrophied from not working, from not actually holding themselves up, that those corsets and all the framing in the corsets would hold them up so much that they lost several inches, that they couldn't stand up straight, that they slouched like this. That was how bad these instruments were. But in any case, folks saw this chair, and the guys especially, who had less cinched waists, said, oh, this is really cool, I can lean back in this chair. And this spawned in many ways, a disregard for fashion at that time. People started to say, well, I could sit better in this chair if I loosened up my constraints, if I loosened up my corset. So a lot of guys got rid of their corsets from this time forward so that they could get this chair, because it was so cool as far as they were concerned. William Morris never bothered with the male girdle. And he, in turn, told his wife he didn't want her to wear a corset. So Jane never wore a corset. None of her children wore corsets. And they changed fashion. They, among the pre-Raphaelites, none of them would wear corsets because, again, that was part of the constraint of that era. Why should we do something that's of the era? If we go back into medieval times, they didn't wear corsets. Instead, they had dresses where it was an entire waist, which means that the dress flowed out directly underneath where the breasts were at. So the dress would taper in here and then flow out from there. So there was no tight waistline that they were trying to constrain themselves to. And women that were wearing those kinds of dresses, they could lounge in this chair too. So a whole mess of women started to throw away their corsets and their undergarments. And what we see is those kind of beginnings of changes in fashion, changes in attitudes. You can certainly think that even with William Morris choosing to marry somebody like Jane Burton, who was of a lower social class than him, was already saying something about the social attitudes at that time. He was from a well-to-do family. It would have made sense for him to marry somebody that was also well-to-do so that they could carry on that family lineage, that they could carry on the wealth. Her dowry would become his money, and then he could refashion it. He didn't marry somebody that had money. He married somebody that he had to support solely. She had no dowry to come into the marriage. And his family, I'm sure, probably had conniptions over him marrying Jane. But regardless of that, this chair became his claim to fame. And people started to really pay attention to him and started to listen to what he had to say. He started writing, he started touring. His company really took off. More and more wallpapers were designed by him, more and more patterns. And the thing that's really interesting about the patterns that he was doing was he was unlike, again, like a lot of the people that were from this era, he wasn't basing these on real plants. So if we think about the paintings and all the stuff from the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, very realistic interpretations. William Morris, maybe because he wasn't such a good artist, or maybe because he was just trying to be revolutionary, he stopped painting things based upon the real way that the plant looked, and he just started doing things in ways that felt creative and interesting to him. So these certainly are not real flowers. There's also a big flattening in the way that he was doing things. Notice that there's no shadows in the plant things that are here. And here, even though there are shadows in some of the tapestry that's here, the background is very flattened. And so it just kind of projects depth, but with the background, it doesn't go off into perspective. And this is kind of telling us about another style that comes along. We're going to talk about that in another week or so. In the meantime, this is something that was showing up in William Morris's work, these flattened kind of graphics. And William Morris was really becoming very, very famous. A lot of people were asking him not just in London to speak, but to actually travel to other countries to speak. And so he was being introduced to a lot of other people that were really liking what the pre-Raphaelites were doing, were liking this idea of turning away from the machine, starting to catch on. That whole pre-Raphaelite movement where it was catching on, more and more people were doing what William Morris was doing. So in his furniture company, he decided that he didn't want to use machines in making his furniture. So all the pieces of furniture that he was doing were handmade. And so in that way, he was reinstating the ideas of this Renaissance kind of craftsmanship. So all the pieces were handmade, hand done. And more people were catching on to this idea and wanting to do that. So other groups that had that same kind of philosophy, clubs were formed, started to do that. And one group called the Century Guild asked him to come speak, and he met with some of the people that were part of that group. And they too were interested in making furniture, but the one thing that he noticed that they were doing that he hadn't thought about doing, William Morris hadn't thought about doing, was they were also involved in printing. So Arthur McMurdo was one of the people that was part of the Century Guild, and he noticed that they used printing a lot. And he started to think about when he was a child, and again, living in this big house in his own father's personal study, and how that space would be filled with these beautiful books that were left over from the times of the Renaissance and up into present day. And he noticed that there was a real drop-off in the quality of books as they moved from the time of the early printing press up into the day that he was around. I have a copy of a book that would have been around the same time that William Morris had been around. And although it's interesting to look at, if you look at it, it's just plain type. There's really nothing embellished or beautiful about the book. It's just, just page after page after page after page of nothing but type, tiny itty bitty type, not really all that interesting in any way, shape, or form. And so he felt like books were kind of suffering for this. But he saw that the Century Guild was doing something really interesting in incorporating printing, and especially like here they did a journal or a magazine that they were selling to people that they were printing themselves. And he thought, printing is another craft that can be done. If we go back to what Johann Gutenberg was doing, that was certainly hand craftsmanship. And so he decided that he wanted to investigate this idea of hand craftsmanship, and so he chose to start printing himself. The other thing that I bring this up for the Century Guild and what was happening here was the Century Guild wasn't the only club around that was doing stuff, that was doing printing. You'll notice that they created their own kind of logo, and what's kind of interesting here when we look at this is that this is a prelude to the style that starts to become Art Nouveau, and we'll look at that again. But this is in the 1880s, and Art Nouveau didn't come around until the 1890s. So some of these folks that were doing stuff that were a part of this Free Raphaelite movement that William Morris was part of were already doing things that we would see later on with Art Nouveau. Regardless of that and the stylings of their mark, there were other clubs that existed, and one club that was an offshoot of the Century Guild was the Art Workers Guild. And the Art Workers Guild, one of the things that they did was they decided that they wanted to have a competition, to have annual competitions, and showcase the work of other craftsmen that were part of their club, and they would showcase it, and then they would exhibit it to people. And up until this time, there was no name for what William Morris was doing, making this furniture, creating these fabrics, doing things that were off the cuff or conceived in his head rather than off of realistic things. They had no name for any of this stuff. But the Art Workers Guild, in one of their competitions, they called it the Great Arts and Crafts Exhibition. They called it the Arts and Crafts Exhibition. And when they started to call it Arts and Crafts, and everybody's like, well, isn't that what William Morris is doing? And they're like, yeah. Okay, so that name stuck. Everything that William Morris was doing was arts and crafts, and from that point forward, everything that everybody was doing in this vein became known as arts and crafts. So it kind of stuck. But in any case, arts and crafts evolved with William Morris, and he started to get himself involved with printing. And so one of the first things that he did was he formed his own printing company that was called Kelmscott Press. And so here's the logo that we can see for the Kelmscott Press, and you can see that it's really ornate. But it should sort of remind us of stuff from the Renaissance period. And if we go back and we look at what Johann Gutenberg was doing, it kind of looks like some of the flourishes and decorations that were in some of the first books that Johann Gutenberg was doing. He named it Kelmscott Press because it was now at this new house that he had built. He felt that Red House, that last house that he had built for his wife, and that's what it was called, Red House. He felt that that house was too far away from the city, so he built something closer into the city, so he built Kelmscott Press. Again, a very castle-like appearance on this building that he built himself. And so here's the faceplate on the Kelmscott Press book, and it shows that house that we saw on the outside. I say that he formed a printing company, but it was a printing company run by one person, William Morris. He did all of the work himself. In fact, he did all of the work himself, including all of the decorative borders, the typeface. He hired people to do the illustrations, but all of the typesetting, all of the things that he chose to put into his books were things that he designed himself. And so the books themselves, again, harkening back to Johann Gutenberg and things from the past, and remembering that we're still in the Victorian era, his books started to look like this, and you can go, oh my God, that's so over the top, and it is. It's poor vacui, extreme. We see a lot of embellishment, very little white space, but we also recognize that he's actually incorporating some modern technology into the things that he's doing. So he would have all of the borders pre-made, so that the only thing that had to be done with this was the typesetting that was in this place. He had block letters that were pre-crafted and carved out of using routing equipment to carve these letters over and over again out of wood, so it was wood type in many regards. And then the illustration that he would hire somebody to do wood engraving. In this case, it was a guy named Walter Craig that he hired to do his wood engraving. But all of the pieces were actually typeset pieces, and he actually conceived this through mass production in many ways. So in this regard, he kind of gave up on the idea of trying to do things that were handcrafted letter by letter or piece by piece, and instead he did things that were mass produced. And William Morris, to his dying day, he was really actually very disappointed by the fact that that he was unable to create a way to do his stuff in a way that it could be purchased by everybody. He really wanted everybody to have the opportunity to buy his furnishings, the stuff that he was selling at his company. But because he was having them made by hand, that jacked the price up, and so a lot of the lower income people that he was trying to make this furniture for, the middle class people, they couldn't afford to buy it, so only the rich people were able to buy this arts and crafts kind of stuff, which is kind of a horrible little irony to it. But we have this turnaround now starting to happen where wealthy people are buying stuff that looked like it was part of the lower class, if you will. All this white space, all of this austerity that is now becoming fashionable for the elites. What were you going to say?
No, there's some quote in the book where he realized he couldn't run a socialistic company in a capitalist economy or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's just sort of like he's like, oh God, I have to do this or
He was
something.
a socialist.
Exactly, yeah.
He
Like
was through and through a socialist. He believed that every man should have equal access to everything. And it should be based upon how much wealth you have. He was really opposed to all of society as it existed in that time. He really wanted to see things more equalized. He also was instrumental to creating a more balanced, historical preservation societies. So people were tearing down these old structures. They thought that they were worthless. They wanted to put up these new Victorian houses. And William Morris was like saying, no, preserve the old buildings, preserve the things from the 1700s, from the 1600s, that they're beautiful in themselves, we shouldn't tear them down. So he was one of the first ones to do that as well. What else can I tell you about William Morris? Obviously he did a lot of stuff here in this book, but he was also, if we start to look at this and we start to analyze it, we can actually see that he's creating some alignments in here. We can start to notice that that this block of type is lining up with this block of type, that this window right here is equal to that window over there, that the frame around here is matching to the baseline of the type over there. So he was actually working with some things that were kind of controlled, and that was an interesting aspect of what he was doing also. And I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I can tell you about William Morris. Are there any questions so far on any of the stuff that we've covered? Okay. So what William Morris was doing, he was not alone in this. There were other people that were starting to play with this idea of what we now know as arts and crafts. If we go to other places in the world, we start to see that not only were they doing arts and crafts, but they were doing their own flavor of it. And in the United States, they didn't even call it arts and crafts in the United States, they called it craftsman style. So if you start to look and look things up in the United States, we see that craftsman style was its own thing. And there was a whole group of people that started to follow William Morris and tried to do their own interpretations of what he was doing, but because they didn't have televisions, they didn't have cameras that they could take pictures of things on a relative basis, they only had catalogs that they could look at. A lot of times they ended up taking these pieces and trying to replicate them in the United States, but they were using industrial materials to do it, and so they pared it down in the style of that Morris chair came to the United States and was very, very different in the American version of that Morris chair than what it looked like in Great Britain and other places. Other places that played with this idea of arts and crafts, well, one of them was in Vienna, and with a group of people called the Vienna Secessionists, a group of artists that were hanging out in Vienna. And it took a while. William Morris died in around 1898, 1896. But in any case, he was very popular. His chair caught on in the 1860s, 1870s, and then he started to do a lot more speaking. By the time he came to the late 1880s, that's when Kelmscott Press started to form. So he was doing furniture all of that time, running his own company, and again, doing speaking engagements all over the place, promoting the idea of this pre-Raphaelite movement and the things that he was doing. In Vienna, it took longer. It took longer before this arts and crafts movement really fit in there. But it was partly because of the way that the art movement was working in Vienna. There was a group of young artists, or actually artists in general, in Vienna. Vienna is in Austria, which is aligned with Germany. And if we remember when we were talking about Austria and Germany and how they were trying to dominate or become a world power, they were not just trying to do that by imperialist means. They weren't just trying to conquer places, but they were also trying to do it through other cultural ways. And one of the ways that they were doing it was through art. And so the artists in Vienna considered themselves very high-minded and progressive in many regards. One of the groups of people that were part of this were part of a group in Vienna called the Künstlerhaus. Künstler means art, and house means house. So Art House was the name of this club that they belonged to. And the club was very big. It had artists that were in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and it had artists that were in their 20s. 20-year-old artists that were part of Künstlerhaus. Among them was a guy named Gustav Klimt, and you can see his painting here. You might recognize this particular painting that he did. He was very progressive, according to the way that a lot of these folks in the Künstlerhaus thought of him. He was using symbolism in his works. You can see that he's got shapes that are kind of looking like eyes. He's got a lot of circles. He's got squares, and he's very flattened out. He used a lot of gold leaf in his stuff. And so we've got this kind of mixing and matching of things that are kind of flattened and things that are dimensional and very different for art in this period of time. There's a lot of other stuff that's been going on in art up until this point, but for what was going on with especially the Vienna artists, they were playing with symbolism. I mentioned symbolism once before when I brought up John Everett Millais and the Paris soap and how he had the little boy blowing the bubble and how that bubble represented childhood and the fleeting notion of childhood, blah, blah, blah. In any case, symbolism really was something that was open for interpretation by people. They looked at symbolic paintings, and it was up to them to decipher what the artist was trying to say. So the artist never really necessarily conveyed it, but I can tell you right off the bat here, the notion of square forms versus circular forms was pretty much unknown among symbolic artists. The square referenced maleness, and the circle referred to femaleness. So you think about circles and babies and breasts and other round parts of female bodies. I won't name any of them, but and then you can think of strong rectangular shapes and how that comes to represent maleness. And so the contrast between these rectangular shapes and these circular shapes were all about the uniting of male and female, if you will. There was also a lot of symbolism going on with mythology in this time. It's not in this particular painting, but that was another thing that was very, very popular, especially among the folks in Künstlerhaus, but in other art groups too. They were playing with mythology and using mythological things to kind of reference their stuff. In any case, with Künstlerhaus, there was kind of a clash between the age groups in Künstlerhaus. As I said, there were some 50, 60-year-old older folks that were part of Künstlerhaus that had been artists for their entire lives. They were traditional in the way that they were painting. And then we had these young people in their 20s and 30s who were seeing new art and seeing really exciting new things happening in the art world. William Morris was just one of many things that were going on at this time. There was Art Nouveau and Impressionism, Post-Impressionism that were all going on. More symbolism and some the beginnings of Expressionism, all starting to happen all around the same time, just a few years away from Cubism happening here. And so these young artists are seeing all of these new ideas and new advances in art, and they want to see more. They want to bring in speakers to come to Künstlerhaus, speak before them, to have exhibitions so that these young artists that are doing these really avant-garde pieces, that they can showcase their stuff. And they don't want to do the traditional stuff that the old folks from Künstlerhaus were doing. And the old folks in Künstlerhaus said, no, we're Vienna, we're strong, we're powerful all by ourselves, we're not going to change our ways. We are a world power unto ourselves. And the young people were saying, well, if we're so progressive, then we shouldn't be afraid of new ideas. And so they had this big clash. They stopped liking each other. And the young people said, all right, fine, you can keep your Kunstler House Club. We don't want to be a part of it. We're going to form our own. And that's what they did. They formed a new group, a new art group that they called themselves the Vienna Secessionists. Secession meaning to break away from a previously established group. And they were from Vienna, so they were the Vienna Secessionists. And it would be all fine and dandy and probably wouldn't have gotten as much attention as it did if it weren't for this particular poster. This right here. This is a poster that Gustav Klimt did for the first exhibition that the Vienna Secessionists put together. And so they had this, again, all of the members of the Vienna Secessionists put together their pieces, and they wanted to put on a big showcase, and they were going to invite judges from other countries to come in, unheard of, other countries to come in, and they have speaking, and it was just going to be a big, big party for new progressive art. And that was all well and good. This poster is just talking about that, where it's going to be, and all of that stuff. But the Kunstler House had a stink over this particular poster. Why?
He's well endowed. I didn't make you laugh, man. He's gonna...
What's going on in this poster? I know
It's slaying a bull. It's like a bull. Is that like a gladiatorial thing over there? I'm trying to make
So you might see the words. It's a kind of blurry, but it's a Theseus and Minotaur in the back.
Okay, that's right. That's okay. I know that story. Yeah.
Taylor, did you have something that you noticed about it?
I know like an indigenous person on the side.
So this is the goddess Athena that's standing there, and she's guarding over this scene that's happening in the background. Does anybody know who Theseus is, or what the story?
Oh
of
yeah,
Theseus
it's Greek
is?
mythology stuff. Okay.
Yep, again, mythology. There were
Oh
totally
God,
into it.
is this the story of the Minotaur? The guy got locked in the maze and all that. And,
Yeah.
Okay.
So the Minotaur would take all the he captured the city, and he trapped all the people into the bowels of the city and trapped them in his maze, the maze that the Minotaur had created. And so all of the people were trapped below ground. They couldn't see the light. They couldn't get out. And Theseus went and he fought with the Minotaur, and he won. He battled the Minotaur, the monster that was keeping everybody trapped into the dark. Symbolism? Keeping people trapped in the dark with their old-fashioned thinking, and freed them so that they could come out into the light.
Yeah, actually, it's on the science show. Actually, they found the actual like the maze or whatever.
Yeah.
Instead, it's more like a ritual site, not necessarily a maze as we would interpret it today. It was kind of a way of sort of communicating with the gods. It was on a science show.
That's okay.
Archaeology.
And then Athena is the god. Not only is she a goddess of war, but she's also a goddess of the arts. So she's kind of watching over this, and she's carrying a shield, and she's got an image in the shield. It could be the face of the Medusa, it could be the face of you staring into the shield. Who knows? But you're allowed to interpret whatever you want from this. But it wasn't the idea that they were using mythology, because this is very popular in Vienna at this time. That wasn't the part that people were upset about. What do you think they were upset about? What is it? I still don't understand.
The words, does words say anything or?
Nope, the words are just saying that there's a big exhibit again, yes. What do you
Because
think?
they were trying to use it to represent like that their group was bringing the people and
In some ways, they were using mythology to tell a story, yes. What do you think?
is it the white space right there in the middle?
The white spaces certainly drew your eye to various parts of the poster. That was kind of new, very, very not horror vacui. That was the opposite of horror vacui, all that white space. There's one big thing. Maybe if I show you how they fixed this poster, you'll get it. You see So here we
Oh
go.
my God.
There we go. So that's how it originated. That's how they fixed it. So Kunstler House didn't have any objection to what the messaging was in this poster. What they objected to is the fact that they had Theseus in the background naked. And it's not like people hadn't seen naked figures in art before. It existed. But you didn't do nakedness to represent some kind of symbolic meaning. it was, if you had a naked character, if it was a god or whatever, it was supposed to be because that was how he was supposed to be represented. And in this case, they turned Theseus, they made him naked because he was supposed to represent the purity, the innocence of those who are fighting for freeing the arts. And they hated that. And so they made a big stink about Theseus in the background being naked.
Yeah, they're jealous.
And had they not done that, probably nobody would have paid too much attention to it. But because they made a big stink about it, the Vienna Secessionists said, okay, we'll fix that, and they redacted parts of their poster and rehung their poster up on the wall. And what people did after that was they were like, what's the big wait, what's the big, it was naked before, wasn't it? It was naked. Oh my God. So they would stand there and they'd squint out and try to see the naked parts of Theseus's body from before, because, you know, it was still that you could sort of see it if it wasn't printed exactly correctly. And so people paid more attention to this poster because Kunstler House had made such a stink about this poster. And so as a result of it, then people said, it's kind of funny. I'll go see what that show's about. And they did. They came. They flocked. Everybody came to it, including the Grand Duke in the area. And people came to see this exhibition. And they were kind of like, oh, this is pretty cool. It's modern, progressive. Yay, Vienna. We're doing some really cool stuff. And the Vienna Secessionists started to get funding. People started to give them money, and they got enough money for it. So by the time they put on their second, third exhibition, they had their own building.
Wow.
They were able to fund it enough that they could build their own structure, and that's exactly what they did. So they built this building, and you'll see on the outside of the building, again, it's very stark, very, very clean, orderly, and you can see that there's elements of, you know, kind of decorative elements at the top. It feels very Egyptian in many ways, this building, but actually there's also elements here that kind of are reminiscent of Greek mythology. Again, this crown at the top of the building, and you can see that there's figures here that are indeed of the Medusas. This word right here, versacrum, is a story unto itself. I'll tell you about that in a few minutes. The words over the door, say to every age it's art, to art is freedom. That's how it translates out. And then we've got all kinds of little elements on the outside of the building, owls that stand for wisdom, and the leaves that represent, again, tying back to Greek mythology and so on. And within the space of this building, they had like walls that could move around, and they could put things up into the spaces, and they could invited all kinds of speakers to come into the space and show their stuff. Gustav Klimt painted a frieze that was part of an exhibition space that looked kind of like this, and don't even ask me what this all means. But it was one of many paintings that Gustav Klimt had done that was part of the Vienna Secessionists and so on. So this is a really cool space. I'm going to stop right here. We're going to talk more about the Vienna Secessionists after Wednesday, but I'm just going to throw it out. Anybody have any questions on the other material that we've talked about so far? Okay. So what we're going to see is how these guys start to fit into this idea of arts and crafts, as well as what William Morris was doing. A day from like